the fact that your child doesn't want to eat a meal that you made or their food, it has nothing to do with your effort as a parent to make the food, right? But it is a daily battle for a lot of parents. And it's one that, it's almost like a put down day in and day out, right? So just to learn to separate the emotion from my kid doesn't like me or likes what I make from they don't like that particular food is super important. Hey guys, welcome back to the MOMables Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Fuentes. I'm a mom to 3 kids and also the founder of MOMables.com. I'm super excited for this season because we're going to dive deep into the world of picky eaters. Now, if you don't have a picky eater, you're so lucky. But don't sign up just yet. You're going to find tons of actionable advice to make mealtimes so much better. What we're really want to focus on this season is establishing healthy mealtime habits that will last a lifetime for our kids. And in case you're not familiar with my story, I spent 7 years seeking out the help of therapists, feeding specialists, and professionals to help my son overcome his extremely picky eating and improve our mealtimes. Now, I want you to know that things aren't always perfect at my house when it comes to meals. I've had more kids since, and it is true that every child is different and requires an individual approach. I just know that you're going to get so much out of this season of podcasts. To help me stay on track and make sure I don't forget to answer a question, I've brought on Paula Arroyo. Paula is my right hand at work, but she's also a mom to 2 young kids, and I just know that you're going to love her too. As always, if you want to drop me a line, I personally read every email you send to hello@momables.com and all the direct messages on Laura S. Fuentes and MOMables Instagram. Now, let's get started with our first episode. In today's episode, we're going to jump right in and talk about the strategies that I learned from the many visits and meetings with specialists. I'm bringing the very best to you to start with so you can see that this season is going to be jam-packed with helpful info. This season is brought to you by Happier Plates. Happier Plates is our digital program that helps parents transform meal times and establish healthy eating habits in their kids. It's a step-by-step masterclass to empower parents to help their picky and selective eaters try new foods. I have more information for you in the show notes right below the video or right below the podcast, and make sure you grab a copy of the ultimate guide to feeding happy kids over at momables.com/feeding happy kids. So Paula, let's get started.
I'm excited to dive in. I think that every mom has dealt with picky eating at some point. I don't know that anyone listening cannot relate. So could we just talk about what is a picky eater and how you identify that in a kid?
Yeah. So a lot of times parents are wondering, is it a stage? Is it is my kid picky? Or some parents, they just know that their kid only eats 5 things, they tell me. But then at the end of the day, it's more than that. So for the purpose of this podcast, we're just going to define a picky eater as a child who's unwilling to eat familiar foods and a child that has strong food preferences. A lot of parents with kids with medical conditions, they also struggle with picky eaters. But for our season of podcasts, we're really going to try to assess normal kids who just are unwilling to eat foods that we parents just kind of go crazy about, right? So that's really what we consider a picky eater in this series.
So for moms who have kids with picky eating issues, they have 5 foods they'll eat, like you said, or they're just going through a stage. I feel like mealtime gets so frustrating. So how do you just make it through another dinner if you're in that season of, I don't even want to go to dinner tonight?
No, you know what? Honestly, that's really a great question because I used to just really struggle with mealtimes as well because the more my child said, I don't want to eat that, or they threw a fit at the table, the more I got frustrated. So it was was like a tug of war game, right? So like I would get frustrated, they would get frustrated, they would lose it at the table. I would argue with my husband. So, and believe me, I am far from perfect. So the very first thing that I learned is that you just got to keep your cool. The fact that your child doesn't want to eat a meal that you made or their food, it has nothing to do with your effort as a parent to make the food, right? But it is a daily battle for a lot of parents. And it's one that, it's almost like a put down day in and day out, right? So just to learn to separate the emotion from my kid doesn't like me or likes what I make from they don't like that particular food is super important. Because then eventually it affects how we see meal times, right? So it's super important to keep your cool no matter what. Oftentimes, one of the reasons kids really make mealtime so frustrating for parents at the dinner time table, it's because this is the one place where a child is often getting all the attention that they want. So I have 3 kids and I work full time and we have after school activities and, both my husband and I are really busy and him and I can barely get a word into our day. So oftentimes we're trying to talk about what's happening with our lives at dinner time, and getting a conversation is really, really difficult. And that's when our kids start to interject and try to go like, I don't like this, or they're really like fussing about the food. Or so we kind of press pause on what him and I are trying to do and shift over to him or her and go, okay, will you just take one bite? Can you just do that? So they see that even though it's not a positive focus, they're getting attention on them. So one of the things that we learn to do is just really important to assess, is my child really trying to call for my attention? Am I always on the phone after school when they're home and not paying attention to them? And therefore dinner time is when they want to be looked at in the eye by me to get their affirmation, attention, love, and encouragement, right? Because those are the things that kids really want from us. So the second our child takes a bite, we're like, oh, see, that was great. Like our whole attitude changes, right? And they can't distinguish or read that really should not be an affirmation, but in their mind, it's like positive reinforcement. And and kids seek that, right? It's the exact same tone that we often put into, oh my gosh, that's such a great picture that you did in art class today. Oh my gosh, you took a bite. How was that? Isn't that delicious? So they don't differentiate the tone. So it's super important to make sure that our child isn't really trying to get our attention at mealtime, and that it's really about them and the food. And so how can you then shift that, right? So it's almost like, it's not if you behave at the dinner table, we're going to get story time. It's more like, hey, listen, if you finish your meal and I get done with the dishes really quickly, we could sit down on the couch and read that chapter of your book that you really like. So it's not about just him or her, like, hey, if you're the one holding up the line. It's more like, hey, if you finish dinner and I get to put away the dishes fast, then we get to sit down and spend time together. So it's a 50-50, even though we could totally save the dishes for after because they take forever to shower, bathe, brush your teeth. It's a shared responsibility, right? So that's really important to encourage our kids by taking the pressure off of what's happening in the food, and more like, hey, make this mealtime experience enjoyable for everyone. And then the last thing, if your child, like mine, is throwing a fit at the table and tears, like I've had my child just vomit all over the table just because they're so worked up and hyped up about how much they don't like a certain food. I mean, of course, a few times I have lost it right after that. But what can you do? So the best thing you do is you just kind of put on your poker face, you take the plate, make sure nothing falls out, put it in the sink, bring out a new plate, and just like nothing ever happened, right? It's the same thing as like if your child spills milk all over the kitchen floor, because it's an accident, and you're like, oh, don't worry, let me just clean it up. Or you throw a fit because there's spilled milk, right? So keeping a cool and putting on your best poker face, super important.
I think it's interesting because it's like you're talking about not going too far positive or too far negative, but just staying in this middle neutral place to keep mealtimes happier.
I mean, the reality is that the more emphasis that you put on mealtimes, or the bigger a deal you make it out to be, the bigger deal is going to be at your house. Okay. The reality is that we eat 3 to 5 times a day. Snack time is always happy. I don't know about your house, but snack time is great, right? But why? Because it's fun. There's less pressure. The child gets to pick what they want. Okay. Dinner time, not so much. Dinner time, everybody's tired, everybody's cranky, and we just want to get through it, right? So The more emphasis you put on dinner time, the more of a big deal it's going to be for everyone.
So in that vein, thinking about dinner time every single night, this can feel like just an insurmountable task to conquer picky eating. So how do you stay encouraged along the way in getting your child to embrace those new foods on a daily basis?
Yeah, so let's just backtrack for 1 second because I forgot to mention about how to introduce those new foods. Mm-hmm. So, and we're going to have other podcast in this season that we're going to cover all those things. But the thing is that if we make the same 3 foods every single week just to make sure they eat something, it's really not helping our cause, right? So when I make a meal plan for the week, which is almost every week, given that I follow our MOMables meal plans, we have a variety of foods served, right? And so I easily already detach the experience from this is what mom picked out for you to this is what the meal plan says we're going to eat, right? So that's one helpful step. I also don't get offended if my kid doesn't like something. There are many times that I go to a restaurant, I order something I think I'm going to like, and then it turns out I really didn't. Or I like part of the meal, but I don't like the side, so I just leave the side. Or I just say, hey, can you hold the fries? Or can you can you not put in a certain ingredient that maybe come with the plate? So really you just have to make a variety of foods. And that's why another reason why I think meal planning or following a meal plan is so helpful, because when I create a plan for the week, the variety is already built in. So that's one less thing I have to worry about, right? So I already know that every meal is going to have like a vegetable, a starch, like a protein component, like all the elements are there. My job is just to make it and go with it, right? So that is how I introduce new foods. Easily by just sort of blaming the meal plan, but having a meal plan together. So then when you sort of take away that emotion from like, oh, but I picked out this meal and now they didn't like it. And so I just detach from that and go, my job is to make great food, fresh food. And their job is to choose whether or not to eat it. It's no different than going to a restaurant, with the exception that I am not a short order cook. Right? I make one meal and that's what everybody gets. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So that's kind of taking a step back on staying encouraged, is that I just literally tell myself like, today didn't go as planned, but tomorrow is another day. It's like staying encouraged with anything else when you're trying something new. It's just being able to stick with it long enough to see the tiny changes that we want to see. Okay. And oftentimes, and we're going to learn about like in the series of podcasts, textures, colors, how to introduce things differently. It really has a lot to do with creativity and being able to, introduce new vegetables or new proteins, whatever it is that your child and your family might struggle with eating in different ways. So, and if you're not creative, again, a meal plan, here's another plug for the meal plans, but like a meal plan really helps because someone else is doing the thinking for you, you know? So there's that.
One less stress from dinner time.
Right. So now that say you're making different meals, week in and week out, keeping track of progress is really important. So, it's really easy to just go like, my kid doesn't like green beans, but I have one kid who he doesn't like green beans, but he will eat them when they're like roasted or grilled, but like they're still very crunchy, and he dips them in ketchup. Like, you know what? If it gets him to, because the truth is like one green bean is going to be exactly how he likes it. And the next green bean is going to be like, not good, not great, but like he kind of mentally knows he can eat them that way. So the other one loves green beans. The other one won't even touch them. So that's what's happening at my house. Right. But the idea is that keeping track of progress will really help you figure out how many foods does your child like? Like I get parents that email me all the time and they say, my kid is an extremely picky eater and he wants peanut butter and jelly every single day and string cheese and grapes. And that is all she'll eat. And I'm like, is that real? And so when I read that, I'm like, okay, that is somebody who's tired of making the exact same foods day in and day out. But if you really think about it, and if you sat down to make a list of the foods your child will eat and break that down by ingredients, is that really all that your child will eat? Right?
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably there's pasta with olive oil. Maybe they may not eat pesto because it's green, but they eat pasta with red sauce. So maybe you could mix the pesto with the red sauce. So when you actually see it lined up by ingredients, because you can mix and match and figure out what ingredients or what things are great vessels for other foods, right? So keeping track of progress or making a list is super important because it's also encouraging for us when we see that we can add something new to the list, just because, hey, I didn't realize that this could go over well if I only added it in with X, food. So that's really, and it really helps you like feel like you just made a small win as a parent, and then it's also like not an overnight thing. So keeping track of progress, it's going to help you, build that list over time.
Right. I love that you do it on the parent end too, because so often we feel like kids won't eat anything because when we say, what do you want? They're like, grapes.
What do you want? Like, yogurt?
Me too. I want grapes and yogurt too, but we need to have something else as well. So it's smart to keep that. I love that idea to keep it on your end where you're just privately listing like, oh, they had pasta that one time and they enjoyed it. Even though the kid may not say, make me pasta.
Right. I will tell you that one of the suggestions a feeding specialist suggested is to make it into a game and put like this board up on the wall and put stars. And okay, number one, let me just tell you that I am not crafty. So I was like, yeah, that's not going to go over well. And then number two, I have 3 kids and we were really, I was really only focused on getting one child to eat other things other than literally 9 foods. And I didn't want to sort of like make it a big deal. Like we were hyper focused on him. So I didn't do that, but I know a lot of parents like to they do the star system. So if you have a star system, a great way to gamify is to make a game out of the meal experience. So if, you could have, it's just like I know a lot of parents have like a chore list with like stickers and see like, did you make your bed? You get a little sticker. Did you brush your teeth tonight? You get a little sticker. So maybe there's a sticker for trying a new food. It doesn't mean they have to eat it or like it, but you get a sticker if you try something new. Right. And I found that that's really helpful because it's not about getting to like something or eating a big bowl of it. It's just trying it. And it doesn't have to happen every day. So you could get 1 point at the end of the week, and that's a point closer towards whatever your chart wins may be.
That's so cool. And then what do you do if, you're tracking progress, the foods that your child likes, and then suddenly they loved something and now they hate it again? How do you reintroduce that food?
Okay, so first let me just say that something I was really guilty of doing is saying something like, oh my gosh, but you just liked it yesterday, right? And it's almost like blaming the kid for not feeling like eating the same thing.
Yeah.
So once I had a therapist ask me, okay, take a step back for a second and assess, did you get broccoli happy? Or it was actually green beans, but did you get green bean happy? And I was like, what does that even mean? And she's like, the day you realized, oh, he ate a green bean, did you then offer it like 4 more times that week? And I was like, yes, that was me. So, so what happens is that sometimes we get so excited to have one new thing on the list that we literally exhaust that item, and obviously it's not going to be every single day, but for some kids it's different. So like the first time my son ate meatballs because he wouldn't eat ground beef, I literally made meatballs for a week. And he was like, not as excited by day 4. He was like, he would have some meatballs in his thermos, so I had to like go, okay. And no, it wasn't just meatballs. It was like hamburgers, because now ground beef opened up like this vessel of like so many foods. And I was like, ooh, we're going to have tacos. We're going to have lasagna. We're going to have this. We're going to have that. And I reinvented it in all these recipes. And then he was like, and then he just wasn't excited to eat that food anymore because he had some severe texture issues. So what I had to do is really take a step back and go and ask myself, did I just become what she called green bean happy? Or is it really, so what, and more than likely it may be yes, but it's also that, I just really don't feel, what they're really trying to tell us is, I really don't feel like eating this today. Mm-hmm. So you could probably say, oh, you know what? I thought you may like carrots again, but if not, just leave them on the side. Again, it's really a lot about eliminating the pressure and about us continuing to make the foods. Now, if you literally waited like 2 more weeks to reintroduce carrots because they liked it 2 weeks ago, and now you're like, okay, I'm going to try it a different way, then again, it's all about serving the food, not making them eat the food, right? And when I say serving, it's about placing the food on the table, as opposed to us controlling how much gets put on their plate. But that's another question in a whole other subject we're going to talk about.
So another thing that I think that a lot of picky eaters struggle with is colors. And we're going to do a whole episode on colors one day, but I did want to think, like, what is one thing that we could do if a child is just refusing to eat orange? They won't have anything orange. They won't have anything green, whatever that color might be. How can we start to introduce those things in a happier way?
Okay. So you're right. We're going to have an entire podcast dedicated to colors because the color green is like the biggest one. And yet we have a lot of kids who will also only eat what are called bland foods. So bananas, bread, mashed potatoes, rice, mac and cheese, dairy, yogurt. So a way is honestly is to just, number one, just offer it. Okay. Yeah. Most of us have grown so accustomed to being rejected by our kids saying no that we no longer offer it. So that's the first step. Number 2 is stop making them try it or taste it. So again, this all goes back to getting attention, but it's a lot about not going, just take 1 bite, you may try it. Why don't you just taste it? Or, well, we have a 2-bite rule, so just try, we have no more 2-bite rules. Now that is really about, would you like some carrots on your plate? No, not really. I'm like, okay, well, just in case you want to know, the carrots have butter on it, garlic and salt, and they're just the way you like they're just the way you like those peas, but I understand you may not want to taste them today. So like I found it really helpful to sometimes kind of create a comparison for them in their mind. So when they're like, well, they kind of take away the color, we really focus it on what it's going to taste like. Like,
Right.
oh, well, it's got butter and garlic and seasoning or an Italian seasoning. It's almost like garlic bread, but not. Or it tastes just like garlic bread, but that's why I mix it in with the carrots. So oftentimes, we're really talking about younger kids here, maybe in the 4 to 8, even 9 range, which is where the most mealtime struggles happen. And also, anything under 4, it's really difficult to really rationalize because they're too young to understand. And here, under kids under 5, it's really all about encouraging them to have and their behavior at the table. Right. So it's really all about like establishing a routine for how to behave at the table, how to talk about food when they don't like it, how to say no politely. So really, it's really about the behavior side. After 4 to 5, you can kind of explain things to your child. So it's really all about rationalizing at their level. This is going to taste like this. This is something that you're familiar with. I have kids that often say like, well, I just don't eat, my son was like, well, I don't like anything green. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure that you love green M&Ms, you like green cake frosting, you like green popsicles, so it's really not green stuff you don't like. Well, okay, you're right. I just don't like green beans. Okay, well, what is it about the green bean that you don't like? I don't know. When I bite it, it tastes funny, or when I bite it, it's kind of sting. So then they start to explain to you, given the opportunity, they explain to you, what is it about that food that they don't like? So there's a lot of information in the discovery and also in the conversations that are without pressure, without guilting our kids into taking one more food and without shaming them, right? Because ultimately our kids really want our approval and they really want to be encouraged by us. And sadly, oftentimes that is the one place where they get it is at dinner time.
Right. So as you're talking about these different ways of introducing foods, it kind of brings to mind one of the things that was most revelatory to me when I took Happier Plates from you was the flavor profiles. Because that was something I had never thought about, was that maybe my kid doesn't just hate green beans. Maybe they really like green bean fries, or they don't like green beans that are flavorless. They want the garlic and the butter and the things that you're talking about. So what is it? How can you figure out what your child likes to eat?
Sure.
And what flavor profiles to use? Yeah.
So one of the things that we teach in Happier Plates or in our course is how to figure out the way that your child actually likes to eat. Okay. So, and this is like so key because, okay, let me just take a step back. It's almost like if you and I are hanging out at the office and you're like, oh, let's go out to eat lunch today. And you're like, ooh, yeah. And what's the next thing I say to you? What do you feel like eating? Right? And so in your mind, you're going to go like, ooh, do I want Mexican food? Oh, do I want like Italian food? Do I want a hamburger? So you kind of go in your mind through like your options.
Right.
So flavor profiles are essentially the same thing. Some kids really like Asian inspired dishes. Other kids really like Italian inspired dishes because they have red sauces. They often have like Italian seasoning, garlic, butter, olive oil, cheese. So there is that flavor profile over there. In my family, like Mexican inspired dishes are a huge win. I have this, we're going to make sure to link it, but I have homemade taco seasoning. I have a recipe on MOMables.com for it, but it's so popular. It's not your regular taco seasoning. It's a little bit more smoky, not as spicy. It's really kid friendly. And it's literally like an all-purpose seasoning at my house. And I use that on everything. I even mix it in on burgers just a little bit to give it a good all-purpose seasoning, but they're not like they don't fully taste like tacos or taco meat. It's just that it has that little bit of seasoning my kids just really love. and they find it, right? Because honestly, kids, like their taste buds, they have so many, their taste buds are really active. That's why they can like pick out that tiny bit of onion in your whole dish, right? Because they can just like, they taste everything. So figuring out how it is that they like food introduced is super important, right? So in my house, we often, things like pesto or broccoli get put into red sauce because tomato sauce hides a lot of nutritious things. Like, I mean, pesto has a ton of vitamins, right? We even have a recipe for broccoli pesto because if you want to add a little bit more nutrition in there and make it a superfood, but if they don't eat green, then you just mix it in with red sauce, right? So anyway, so figuring out that flavor profile or what type of restaurant would they prefer to eat at, it's really important, right? Because then you can, if you're not subscribed to our meal plan, like when we plan our weekly plans, we make sure that every day is slightly different. And yet when we take a step back at the month, we know that there is congruency, right? There's like 2 Italian dishes here, 2 here, 2 there. There's one Asian inspired. There's, so it's almost like a puzzle, but we build that into that rotation of introducing new flavors and new foods, right? So you kind of have to think about it like that, not just go like, what are we going to eat today? But it's more like, what are we going to eat for the week? And how do I add as much variety with a small list of ingredients, right? Because otherwise you're like buying 100 ingredients for the week. And we really want to keep it down to things that are simple, fresh, and really versatile to create a ton of recipes with. So I think I answered your question, right?
You did. Yes, you did. So we're closing the podcast pretty soon, but I just want like 1 or 2 best tips for keeping the momentum going once a picky eater has gone ahead and tried something new. You don't want to overwhelm them. You already said, don't get green bean happy, but how do we keep going?
So honestly, how do we wake up every day? You essentially wake up and say, today is a new day. Today, it's really up to us to inspire ourselves and to get into a better mood and how we approach that day. Mealtimes is essentially the same things. Some days are going to be better. Some days are totally going to suck. But that is normal, right? It happens to everyone. Okay. And the momentum is just, like, my kids will still say like, oh, I really don't like that. I was like, you know what? Today may not be your favorite food, but tomorrow might be better, or well, don't, or like, oh, this is disgusting. Hey, that is actually my favorite thing to eat. Or actually Dad really likes that. So don't say it's disgusting. In the course, we also talk about how to teach our kids politely to say no, thank you. Or, and oftentimes it's just about creating a frame of reference for them. Right. So like, I told my daughter one time, like, hey, I would never say that artwork is disgusting and you made it. So don't tell me that a meal that I made is disgusting because I like it or Dad likes it. It hurts his feelings. So oftentimes kids just don't, it's really about teaching them, how to, what we say to parents, how to use your words, right? And the truth is that sometimes they're just too little to express themselves. So you keep the momentum going by finding a way to not take it personally, right? Because it has nothing to do with your effort. It has all to do with them learning how to eat new foods. It's just like riding a bike. The first time you're going to fall. And sometimes you ride a bike like a pro, like me, and then years later you're riding like your bike in the neighborhood with your kid. Like you don't see the little nick in the road and take a splash forward. It just happens. Right. So it's just, day in and day out, it's really all about how our attitude towards mealtimes that keeps that momentum going. All right. So of course, in the course, we dive much deeper into these strategies and what to do before mealtimes, how to set them up for success. But I feel like today's episode really had a great overview to really help you get started. I know that it can be really difficult to make meals day in and day out as a parent. But really just know that you're not alone. Of course, we have all of the notes for this podcast and show notes and that ultimate guide to feeding happy kids available on the site. So make sure you check that out for more resources and information.